The more you chase people, the faster they run away from you. But what if I told you that 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius discovered the exact opposite approach that makes everyone desperately want your attention and approval? This ancient Roman emperor knew that true magnetic power comes from complete emotional independence, and when you master these 4 timeless principles, people will start pursuing your friendship, respect, and even love without you lifting a finger. The secret isn't in what you do to attract others, but in what you stop doing that's currently repelling them. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment what part of the world you're watching from. Because now I'm going to tell you everything. You're staring at your phone again. You sent that message 3 hours ago. The double check mark shows they've read it, but there's no reply. Your mind races with possibilities. Did I say something wrong? Are they ignoring me? Should I send another message? Maybe they're just busy. But what if they're not? This feeling, this gnawing anxiety of wanting someone's attention and validation, isn't just uncomfortable. It's exhausting, and you're not alone. In a recent psychological study, over 78% of adults reported experiencing significant distress when they felt ignored or overlooked by someone whose attention they valued. Another study found that the average person checks their phone 96 times per day, once every 10 minutes, with the primary motivation being to check if someone has responded to them. I want you to try something right now. Take a moment to notice your own behavior. How many times have you checked your phone today, hoping for a message, a like, or some form of acknowledgement? How does it feel when that validation doesn't come? There's a hollowness to it, isn't there? A subtle sense that somehow your worth has diminished. But this problem isn't new. It's not a product of modern technology. The human need for validation and the pain of feeling overlooked has been with us since the beginning of civilization. Even the most powerful individuals in history weren't immune to it. Take Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled at the height of Rome's power. Before he became the philosophical emperor, writing wisdom in his tent during military campaigns, he was just another human being craving acceptance. In his private journals, which later became the book Meditations, he repeatedly reminds himself not to be disturbed by others' opinions or lack of attention. Why would the most powerful man in the world need to remind himself of this? Because even emperors aren't immune to the human need for validation. Marcus wrote, "I have often wondered how it is that every person loves themselves more than others, but yet cares more about the opinion of others than their own." He recognized that we paradoxically value others' assessment of us more than our own self-assessment, a psychological trap that creates neediness and dependency. Think about how this plays out in your own life. You send a message to someone you're interested in, romantically or professionally, and they don't respond quickly. How long before you start second-guessing yourself? How long before you begin crafting another message or checking if they've been active online? This desperate need for their validation isn't just making you anxious, it's making you less attractive to them. Epictetus, another Stoic philosopher, approached this from a different angle. Born a slave with physical disabilities, he had every reason to desperately seek validation. Instead, he developed a philosophy of emotional independence that made him so compelling that even emperors sought his wisdom. Make it your goal to build your life on what is actually within your control, he taught, and free yourself from the opinions and judgments of others. What does this look like in practice? Imagine sending that message and then genuinely forgetting about it because you're fully engaged in your own meaningful life. Imagine meeting someone new and being completely present with them, not anxiously monitoring their expressions for signs of approval. Imagine expressing your true thoughts in a meeting without calculating how each word might affect your status in the group. This emotional independence isn't just philosophically sound, it's magnetically attractive. In a fascinating psychological experiment at the University of Rochester, researchers had participants interact with two different types of people, those who showed signs of needing validation and those who displayed emotional independence. Afterward, participants were asked who they found more attractive and who they'd prefer to spend more time with. The results were clear. People who projected self-contained confidence were consistently rated as more attractive and desirable for future interaction. But there's a crucial distinction we need to make. I'm not talking about playing manipulative games or using artificial hard-to-get tactics. Those strategies inevitably backfire because they're rooted in the same insecurity they're trying to hide. What I'm talking about is developing genuine emotional independence, a centered confidence that paradoxically makes you more connected to others while being less dependent on them. Seneca, advisor to Emperor Nero, until Nero forced him to commit suicide, observed how people would exhaust themselves chasing affection and attention, only to push away the very people they were trying to attract. "No one can be loved except by being free from need," he wrote in one of his letters. Let me share a real example of how this works. James had been pursuing Sarah for weeks, always initiating contact, always available, always quick to respond. She was polite but increasingly distant. After learning about the Stoic principle that we'll call the inverted pursuit principle, the idea that what we chase often runs from us, James decided to focus on his own life and projects. He stopped checking if she had viewed his stories, stopped initiating conversations, and immersed himself in activities that gave him genuine fulfillment. 2 weeks later, Sarah texted him, "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" Their dynamic had completely shifted, not because James was playing games, but because he had genuinely reclaimed his sense of self-worth, independent of her attention. What makes this problem so persistent is that we're fighting against evolutionary wiring. Our brains evolved in small tribal groups where social rejection could mean death. Being overlooked by the tribe wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. So our nervous systems developed powerful alarm systems that create anxiety when we sense we might be losing social connection. This creates a neurochemical cycle that's hard to break. When you're anxiously waiting for someone's response, your brain produces cortisol, the stress hormone, which creates that uncomfortable feeling of anxiety. When they finally respond, you get a hit of dopamine, the pleasure neurochemical, which momentarily relieves the anxiety. But then the cycle starts again, and each time it takes more validation to produce the same relief. You've essentially created an addiction to external validation. Let's try something right now. I want you to think about a situation where you're currently seeking someone's validation or approval. Maybe it's a romantic interest who's been inconsistent in their communication. Maybe it's a boss whose approval you desperately want. Maybe it's a friend group where you feel you need to prove your worth. Now, I want you to pause the video, get a piece of paper, and draw a line down the middle. On the left side, write down all the things that make you valuable that have nothing to do with this person's opinion or attention. On the right side, write down activities that make you feel fulfilled independent of external validation. This is what the Stoics would call a self-worth inventory, and it's the first step in breaking free from the prison of external validation. When you have a clear sense of your intrinsic worth and a life filled with meaningful activities, you naturally become less dependent on any one person's response to you. Now I'd like to introduce you to what I call the 3-day indifference challenge. This is a practice directly inspired by the Stoic concept of philosophical indifference. Not cold detachment, but a calm acceptance that you'll be perfectly fine regardless of a particular outcome. Choose one relationship where you've been the pursuer, whether romantic, friendship, or professional. And for just 3 days, practice philosophical indifference toward their response. This means no checking if they've read your message, no initiating contact, no social media monitoring of their activity, no adjusting your schedule in hopes of running into them. Instead, redirect that energy into the self-worth activities you just identified. Commit to spending at least 30 minutes each day on one of those activities. This isn't a manipulative tactic to make them chase you. It's a practice in developing genuine emotional independence. And yes, paradoxically, this often results in the other person becoming more interested in you, but that's a side effect, not the goal. Emma tried this with a colleague she'd been trying to impress for months. She'd been constantly seeking his approval, adjusting her opinions to match his, and feeling devastated when he didn't acknowledge her contributions. For 3 days, she stopped monitoring his reactions and instead focused on producing work she personally found valuable. She spoke her mind in meetings even when her views differed from his. She pursued projects she found meaningful rather than those that might impress him. The result? Not only did she feel more confident and centered, but by the end of the week, her colleague asked her to collaborate on a major project, something she'd been hoping for months. The shift didn't come from pursuing his attention more skillfully. It came from genuinely needing it less. Now, I want to be clear, this is not a quick fix. It's not a trick or a hack. It's a profound shift in how you relate to yourself and others, and like any meaningful change, it takes practice and patience. The Stoics understood that transformation happens through daily disciplines, not overnight revelations. That's why I've developed what I call the 21-day Stoic Independence Protocol, a 3-week process that will systematically rewire your relationship with external validation. By the end of this video, you'll have a complete roadmap for implementing this protocol in your own life, and you'll understand exactly how it can transform your relationship dynamics. But before we dive into that protocol, we need to understand the most fundamental insight the Stoics discovered, the principle that changes everything about how we relate to others. It's what Epictetus, a man born into slavery, taught even to emperors. It's about understanding exactly what's under your control and what isn't, and how that understanding can instantly transform your magnetic presence. Imagine waking up every day without that gnawing anxiety about how others will react to you. Picture yourself walking into a room with a calm certainty that, regardless of who approves or disapproves of you, your sense of self remains unshaken. This isn't some unattainable superpower. It's the direct result of understanding one fundamental principle that the ancient Stoics mastered. The story of Epictetus is particularly striking here. Born into slavery around 55 CE, he suffered a physical disability when his master broke his leg so severely that he limped for the rest of his life. If anyone had reason to desperately seek validation and approval from others, it was him. Yet somehow, this former slave developed such powerful emotional freedom that even free men, citizens, and eventually emperors sought his wisdom. How did he accomplish this remarkable transformation? It came down to one central insight: the clear distinction between what we control and what we don't. Epictetus opened his handbook of philosophy with this principle. Some things are within our control, while others are not. Within our control are our opinions, pursuits, desires, and aversions. Not within our control are our body, property, reputation, status. In other words, anything that is not our own action. This insight might seem simple at first glance, but its implications are profound when applied to how we seek validation from others. Let me illustrate this with a visualization that can change everything about how you interact with others. Imagine 2 circles. The smaller inner circle contains everything you actually control: your thoughts, your actions, your responses, your attention, your effort. The larger outer circle contains everything else: other people's opinions, traffic conditions, the weather, promotion decisions, whether someone responds to your message, and countless other externals. Now pause the video for just 10 seconds and consider your biggest relationship concern right now. Maybe it's a romantic interest who's been inconsistent in their communication. Maybe it's a colleague who doesn't seem to value your input. Whatever it is, ask yourself, is this concern in my inner circle of control or the outer circle of things I cannot control? If you're honest with yourself, you'll recognize that most of what's causing you anxiety lives in that outer circle. You can't control whether someone responds to your message. You can't control whether your boss recognizes your contribution. You can't control whether someone chooses you or someone else. And here's where the Stoic insight becomes transformative. When you focus your emotional energy on things outside your control, you create anxiety, neediness, and dependency. But when you focus exclusively on what you do control, you develop a natural confidence that others find magnetically attractive. Let's make this practical with a common scenario. You've sent a message to someone you're interested in. They've seen it. Those 2 check marks or read receipt are visible, but they haven't responded. What parts of this situation do you control, and what parts don't you control? You don't control whether they respond, when they respond, what they think of your message, what they're doing instead of responding, their level of interest in you. You do control your interpretation of the situation, what you focus your attention on while waiting, how you spend your time between now and when if they respond, your decision about when if to send another message, your ability to engage in meaningful activities regardless of their response. Do you see the profound shift here? When you obsessively check your phone, wondering why they haven't responded, creating stories about what their silence means, you're living entirely in the outer circle of things you don't control. This creates anxiety, neediness, and the kind of desperate energy that subtly repels others. But when you focus exclusively on the inner circle, choosing a constructive interpretation, engaging in meaningful activities, deciding thoughtfully about your next action, you develop a centered confidence that others can sense immediately. A client of mine, let's call him Carlos, was constantly seeking approval from his boss. He would check his email obsessively after sending reports, adjust his opinions in meetings to match his manager's thinking, and feel devastated when his contributions weren't acknowledged. His entire sense of professional worth depended on this one person's validation. After learning about the dichotomy of control, Carlos made a critical shift. He created 2 lists, exactly like I'm suggesting you do right now. On one list, he wrote everything about his job that was within his control: the quality of his work, his preparation for meetings, his continued learning and skill development, his behavior toward colleagues. On the second list, he wrote what was beyond his control: his boss's mood, whether his contributions were recognized, promotion decisions, office politics. For 3 weeks, Carlos committed to focusing exclusively on his control list, while practicing philosophical indifference toward the cannot control list. The transformation was remarkable. Not only did his anxiety decrease dramatically, but his boss actually called him into his office to discuss a promotion. "There's something different about you lately," his boss remarked. "You seem more confident, more self-directed." Carlos hadn't been using manipulation tactics. He had genuinely developed emotional independence by focusing solely on what he controlled. The neuroscience behind this transformation is fascinating. When you focus on what you can't control, like someone's response to you, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, activates, creating anxiety and stress hormones. But when you redirect your attention to what you do control, you activate your prefrontal cortex, the rational planning center of your brain, which produces a state of calm confidence. This shift is visible to others. Research shows that when your nervous system is calm and centered, you display subtle but powerful signals through your facial expressions, voice tonality, and body language. Others can sense this change immediately, often without consciously realizing what's different about you. Here's a challenge I want you to try this week. Apply the dichotomy of control to 3 different social situations. Before each interaction, take 30 seconds to remind yourself what you control, your authenticity, attention, effort, and what you don't control, their response, opinion, level of interest. Then consciously choose to focus exclusively on what you control during the interaction. Notice how this changes the quality of your presence. Notice how it frees you from the desperate need to manage their impression of you. Notice how it allows you to be more authentic, more present, and paradoxically, more connected. One powerful way to implement this shift is what I call the mental transfer technique. Imagine carrying two buckets, one filled with things you control and one with things you don't control. Every time you catch yourself worrying about something, pause and ask, which bucket does this belong in? If it's in the cannot control bucket, mentally transfer it to the can control bucket by finding the related aspect you do control. For example, instead of, why haven't they texted me back? Uncontrollable. Shift to, I'll focus on this interesting project while I wait. Controllable. Instead of, will they like me? Uncontrollable. Shift to, I'll be authentic and engaged in our conversation. Controllable. This mental transfer creates an immediate sense of empowerment. Rather than feeling helpless and anxious, you reconnect with your agency and capability. This shift is palpable to others who subconsciously register your self-contained confidence. A fascinating study from the University of California examined how focus of control affects interpersonal attraction. Participants were paired with people who exhibited either an internal focus, centered on what they could control, or an external focus, preoccupied with outside validation. Afterward, participants consistently rated those with an internal focus as more attractive, trustworthy, and desirable for future interaction, even though they couldn't consciously identify what created this preference. Think about your own experience. When someone is constantly checking your reactions, adjusting their behavior to please you, and seeming desperate for your approval, how does it make you feel? There's something subtly off-putting about it, isn't there? Yet when someone is self-contained, authentic, and present with you without needing your validation, don't you find yourself more drawn to them? The dichotomy of control creates this attractive quality naturally. It's not a manipulation tactic, it's a fundamental shift in how you relate to yourself and others. Let's make this even more practical. Right now, I want you to think of a recent situation where you felt anxious about someone's opinion or response to you. Maybe you were waiting for feedback on something important. Maybe you were hoping for recognition that didn't come. Maybe you were anxiously checking if someone had viewed your social media post. Now draw two circles on a piece of paper, one inside the other. In the inner circle, write down everything about that situation that you actually controlled. In the outer circle, write everything you didn't control. Be ruthlessly honest with yourself about this distinction. Next, identify one specific action you can take right now that focuses entirely on your inner circle of control. Perhaps it's developing a skill that matters to you regardless of others' recognition. Perhaps it's creating something meaningful whether or not anyone else appreciates it. Perhaps it's making a decision based on your values rather than others' potential reactions. Commit to taking that action within the next 24 hours. This isn't just a philosophical exercise. It's a practical rewiring of your relationship with external validation. The beauty of this approach is that it works in every relationship context: romantic, professional, friendship, family. The principle remains the same. Focus exclusively on what you control, practice philosophical indifference toward what you don't control, and watch as your neediness dissolves and your natural attractiveness emerges. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor of the known world, reminded himself daily of this distinction. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. If the most powerful man in the Western world needed this reminder, perhaps we can benefit from it too. but knowing what you control is just the beginning. The Stoics had another powerful technique for eliminating the fear of rejection entirely. Seneca, who advised emperors and was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, practiced something that seems counterintuitive at first. He deliberately imagined the worst possible scenarios each morning. This exercise, which I'll share with you now, eliminates the fear of rejection at its roots, allowing you to relate to others from unshakable confidence. Have you noticed how the fear of rejection can paralyze even the most confident people? Think about that moment when you're about to send an important message, pitch an idea, or express your feelings, and that tight knot forms in your stomach. That fear isn't just uncomfortable. It fundamentally changes how you show up in the world. But what if there was a way to become completely immune to that fear? Not through avoidance, but through a counterintuitive technique that the Stoics mastered centuries ago. Seneca, one of Rome's most influential Stoics, had a peculiar morning routine that would seem almost pessimistic to modern ears. He would wake up each day and immediately tell himself, "Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness." Now, why would one of history's most successful advisors, writers, and businessmen start his day with such seemingly negative thoughts? Because he understood something profound about human psychology. When you mentally prepare for difficult outcomes in advance, they lose their power to destabilize you when they actually occur. The Stoics called this practice premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Today, we'll explore how this ancient technique can transform your fear of rejection into unshakable confidence. Let me ask you something personal. Think about the last time someone's response, or lack of response, really upset you. Maybe they didn't reply to your message. Maybe they declined your invitation. Maybe they chose someone else for an opportunity you wanted. Remember how that felt? That sinking feeling? That questioning of your worth, that desperate urge to fix the situation? What if I told you that reaction was entirely optional? Not through suppression or denial, but through a practice that actually prepares your mind to remain centered, regardless of others' reactions to you. This is where the Stoic practice of preemptive acceptance becomes life-changing. It's about mentally accepting in advance that some people won't respond to you, some will reject you, and some will ignore you. And that's perfectly okay, because your worth doesn't depend on their responses. Here's how it works. I want you to think about a current situation where you're seeking someone's approval or response. Maybe it's a message you're waiting for, a presentation you're nervous about, or a relationship where you feel you're walking on eggshells. Got it in mind? Now I want you to take 20 seconds, actually pause the video, and vividly imagine the worst reasonable outcome. Not catastrophic fantasies, but the genuinely possible negative outcome. They don't respond. They say no. They choose someone else. They're critical of your work. See it clearly in your mind. Now, here's the crucial part. Imagine yourself responding to this outcome with complete dignity and self-possession. You don't crumble. You don't become desperate. You accept it calmly and continue with your life, recognizing that your worth remains completely intact regardless of their response. This practice isn't pessimism. It's psychological preparation that liberates you from the fear that controls most people's social behavior. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy calls this decatastrophizing, reducing the emotional impact of rejection by mentally rehearsing your calm acceptance of it before it happens. Let me tell you about Anna, who used this technique to transform her interview anxiety. Before learning about preemptive acceptance, she would be completely thrown off by any sign of negative feedback during job interviews. Her voice would shake, her confidence would crumble, and her performance would spiral downward at the first hint of disapproval. After implementing this Stoic practice, she began each day of interview preparation by vividly imagining the interviewer looking unimpressed, asking challenging questions, even expressing skepticism about her qualifications. But crucially, she also imagined herself responding with calm dignity, not defensively, not desperately, but with genuine self-assurance. When she eventually faced actual tough interviews, something remarkable happened. Instead of being destabilized by challenging moments, she found herself thinking, here it is, exactly what I prepared for. And she responded with a composure that impressed even the most skeptical interviewers. The rejection scenarios had lost their power to throw her off balance. The science behind this practice is fascinating. When you repeatedly visualize facing rejection while maintaining your composure, you're actually retraining your amygdala, the brain's fear center. Research in exposure therapy shows that mental rehearsal activates many of the same neural pathways as actual experience. You're essentially desensitizing your nervous system to the very scenarios that once triggered anxiety. There's a crucial distinction I need to emphasize here. Preemptive acceptance is not about expecting failure or being pessimistic. It's about removing the fear of failure so you can show up more authentically and powerfully in every interaction. Consider how this transforms your social presence. When you're terrified of rejection, you walk on eggshells around others. You carefully monitor every word, analyze every text before sending it, and adjust your authentic expression to minimize any risk of disapproval. This creates a subtly anxious energy that others can sense immediately. But when you've already accepted the possibility of rejection, you're free to be genuinely yourself. You can express your thoughts directly. You can make the bold request. You can state your authentic opinion. You stop the exhausting performance of trying to be whoever you think others want you to be. This quality of genuine self-expression is magnetic to others. Think about people you deeply respect. Aren't they often those who speak their truth without excessive concern about how it might be received? This doesn't mean being insensitive or bulldozing others' feelings. It means expressing yourself with both courage and consideration, free from the desperate need for approval. Let's make this practical with a powerful exercise you can implement starting today. I call it the Premeditation Journal. Take 5 minutes each morning to write down your answers to these 3 questions. First, what's a potential rejection or disappointment I might face today? Be specific. Second, how would it feel if this happened? Allow yourself to honestly name the emotions. Third, how would my best self respond to this scenario? Visualize responding with dignity, not desperation. This simple practice, done consistently, creates a psychological immune system that makes you remarkably resilient to rejection. And here's the paradox. When rejection loses its power to devastate you, you actually become less likely to experience it because you're no longer approaching others with the desperate energy that often repels them. One participant in our program described her experience this way. After 3 weeks of the Premeditation Journal, I noticed something strange. I was getting fewer actual rejections. It took me a while to realize what had changed. When I stopped fearing rejection, I stopped overcompensating with people-pleasing behaviors that actually made me less authentic and less attractive to others. Now let's take this practice to the next level with a guided preemptive acceptance meditation. I'm going to walk you through this process, and I encourage you to actually practice it with me right now. Close your eyes if you're in a place where it's safe to do so. Take 3 deep breaths, in through your nose and out through your mouth. Now, bring to mind a specific situation where you're seeking someone's approval or response. See it clearly. Notice any anxiety or attachment you feel about the outcome. Next, imagine this person not giving you the response you want. They decline, they criticize, they choose someone else. They don't respond at all. See this happening in vivid detail. Now feel the initial emotional response in your body. Where do you feel it? In your chest, your stomach, your throat. Just notice these sensations without judgment. As you continue breathing deeply, Imagine these feelings gradually subsiding, not because the situation changed, but because you remembered your inherent worth that doesn't depend on this person's response. Now visualize yourself responding to this rejection with complete dignity. See your posture remaining upright. Feel your sense of self-worth intact. Imagine yourself calmly continuing with your meaningful life, recognizing that this person's response doesn't define your value. Take 3 more deep breaths, and when you're ready, open your eyes. If you actually did this exercise, you've just experienced what the Stoics practice daily, the mental rehearsal that builds emotional resilience. Remember, this isn't about expecting negative outcomes. It's about removing their power to devastate you. As Epictetus taught, it's not events that disturb people, it's their judgments about events. When you judge rejection as acceptable rather than catastrophic, you liberate yourself from the prison of others' opinions. Let's address an important objection that might be arising in your mind. But isn't this practice going to make me negative or pessimistic? The evidence suggests exactly the opposite. Research in defensive pessimism shows that people who mentally prepare for challenges actually experience more positive emotions overall than those who avoid thinking about potential negatives. Why? Because unaddressed fears create background anxiety that permeates everything, while consciously processed fears lose their diffuse power. Think of it like this. Preemptive acceptance doesn't create fear. It addresses the fears that are already controlling your behavior below the surface of awareness. By bringing them into consciousness and rehearsing your dignified response, you're actually creating the conditions for greater confidence and optimism. This practice transforms not just how you feel, but how you communicate with others. When you're no longer terrified of rejection, your communication becomes more direct and authentic. You can ask for what you want without the desperate energy that often undermines your request. You can express disagreement without fear of disapproval. You can set boundaries without anxiety about losing connection. Imagine sending a message without obsessively checking for a response. Imagine making a request without apologizing 3 times in the same sentence. Imagine expressing your authentic opinion without immediately scanning for signs of disapproval. This is the freedom that comes with preemptive acceptance. The transformation in your social dynamics can be profound. When rejection loses its sting, you paradoxically become more attractive to others. Think about it. Confidence is universally attractive. And what is confidence if not the calm certainty that you'll be okay regardless of how others respond to you? A study on rejection sensitivity found that people who scored high on fear of rejection were rated as less appealing in social interactions. Not because they were less valuable people, but because their anxiety about rejection created behaviors that made others uncomfortable. The desperate need for approval actually pushes away the very approval we seek. Let's integrate what we've learned with a concrete challenge for this week. I call it the Rejection Resilience Challenge. Every morning, practice the pre-meditation journal exercise we discussed. Then, each day, intentionally do one small thing that risks minor rejection, something where no is a possible answer. Maybe it's making a slightly bold request. Maybe it's expressing an authentic opinion that might not be popular. Maybe it's sharing something you created without qualifying it with self-deprecation. The specific action isn't as important as the practice of risking rejection while carrying your full dignity. After each experience, regardless of the outcome, acknowledge yourself for the courage it took. This isn't about the results. It's about strengthening your rejection resilience muscle through consistent practice. What you'll find after a week of this practice is that rejection scenarios that once seemed terrifying now feel manageable. The pit in your stomach when someone doesn't immediately respond to your message, significantly diminished. The anxiety spiral when someone seems unimpressed by your contribution. replaced with calm self-assurance. This isn't just philosophical theory, it's neurological rewiring. You're literally creating new neural pathways that process potential rejection with equanimity rather than panic. This is what the Stoics intuited thousands of years before we had the brain's science to explain it. As Seneca wisely noted, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. By facing the imagined suffering directly and rehearsing your dignified response, you free yourself from both the imagined suffering and much of the actual suffering that would otherwise occur. Remember that this practice, like all Stoic techniques, isn't about perfection. There will still be moments when rejection stings. The difference is that those moments no longer define you or control your behavior. You learn to feel the temporary discomfort and move forward with your inherent dignity intact. Living with preemptive acceptance creates a profound shift in your presence. You no longer carry the desperate energy of someone terrified of disapproval. Instead, you move through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth isn't determined by others' responses. And this quality, this self-contained dignity, is what naturally draws others to you. But acceptance alone isn't enough for a truly fulfilled life. The Stoics understood that we need more than emotional resilience. We need a life that feels complete and meaningful regardless of others' validation. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly when he wrote, "Be content with who you are, and wish no one else but to be themselves." This practice of developing a self-sufficient life, which I'll share with you now, creates the kind of magnetic presence that naturally attracts others without any effort on your part. Imagine feeling so complete within yourself that other people's attention becomes a pleasant bonus rather than a desperate need. This sense of inner fullness isn't just philosophically satisfying, it's magnetically attractive to others. When you no longer need someone to complete you, you paradoxically become someone others want to be around. This is what the Stoics understood intuitively, and what modern psychology now confirms through research. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly when he wrote, "Be content with who you are, and wish no one else but to be themselves." Though he ruled the most powerful empire on earth, Marcus understood that true satisfaction comes from within, not from external validation or power. But what exactly does this mean in practical terms? How do we cultivate this kind of self-sufficiency in our everyday lives? The principle of eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or well-being, is central to Stoic philosophy. Unlike the temporary high of receiving a notification or someone's approval, eudaimonia represents a sustainable form of happiness that comes from living virtuously and developing inner resources that no one can take away from you. Think of it as building a well inside yourself, rather than constantly carrying buckets from someone else's water source. Let's make this practical with an exercise I call the diversification of relationships portfolio. Just as financial advisors warn against putting all your money in a single stock, Stoics recognize the danger of investing all your emotional capital in any single relationship. Take a moment right now, yes, actually pause, and mentally list all the different relationships and communities that contribute to your sense of belonging and connection. If you're hyper-focused on just one or two people, you've created a dangerous emotional dependency. A balanced portfolio might include close friends, family connections, professional relationships, community groups, and even intellectual or spiritual connections with authors or thinkers who inspire you. When you distribute your need for connection across multiple sources, no single person's response or lack of response has the power to devastate you. I want you to identify one area of your relationship portfolio that's been neglected while you've been focusing on pursuing someone else's validation. Perhaps it's friends you haven't connected with, a community group you've been meaning to join, or even a relationship with yourself through a creative practice. Now commit to one specific action this week to strengthen that area. This isn't about distraction. It's about creating a more balanced emotional ecosystem. Let me share how this principle transformed Emma's life. For months, she had been obsessively focused on winning approval from a colleague she admired. She adjusted her opinions to match his, felt devastated when he didn't acknowledge her contributions, and constantly analyzed their interactions for signs of his approval. Her emotional well-being had become completely dependent on his responses. After learning about the diversification of relationships portfolio, Emma made a conscious decision to reinvest in other areas of her life. She reconnected with friends she'd been neglecting, joined a weekly book club she'd been putting off, and recommitted to her painting practice that had always brought her joy. Within weeks, something remarkable happened. Not only did she feel more emotionally stable, but her colleague actually approached her about collaborating on a major project. When she was no longer desperately seeking his approval, she naturally became more attractive as a potential partner. The neuroscience behind this transformation is fascinating. When you engage in activities that activate your brain's intrinsic reward system, creative pursuits, learning, meaningful connections, physical movement, your brain produces serotonin and dopamine without requiring external validation. This creates a natural confidence and ease that others can sense immediately. You're no longer approaching interactions from a place of lack, but from a place of fullness. Here's a simple test to gauge your level of self-sufficiency in any relationship. Ask yourself, if this person disappeared from my life tomorrow, would I still have a life that feels meaningful and complete? If the answer is no, you've created a dependency that's not only psychologically unhealthy, but also paradoxically makes you less attractive to that very person. People are naturally drawn to those who would be fine without them, not those who desperately need them. Another crucial element of self-sufficiency is developing competence in areas that matter to you. The Stoics emphasized that true confidence comes not from others' opinions, but from knowing your own capabilities. When you develop skills and knowledge that create tangible results, you build what psychologists call earned confidence, a stable sense of self-worth based on what you can actually do, not on what others think of you. What's one skill that, if you developed it further, would give you a greater sense of competence and self-assurance? Maybe it's public speaking, writing, a professional capability, or even social skills themselves. Committing to deliberate practice in this area creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As your competence grows, so does your confidence, which makes you less dependent on others' validation, which paradoxically makes others more drawn to you. A fascinating study from the University of Rochester found that perceived emotional independence was rated as one of the most attractive qualities in potential partners, more important than physical appearance or financial success. When participants interacted with people who projected calm self-assurance rather than anxious need for approval, they reported significantly higher levels of attraction and interest in future interaction. This isn't about being cold or distant. It's about bringing your full, authentic self to interactions without needing others to fill an internal void. Now, I'd like you to try something that might feel uncomfortable at first. Think of someone whose validation you've been seeking. Imagine that for the next 3 days, you'll interact with them from a place of complete self-sufficiency. You enjoy their company when you're with them, but you don't need their approval or attention to feel complete. How would that change your body language, your tone of voice, the topics you discuss, the questions you ask? Take a moment to really feel into this shift. This isn't role-playing or putting on an act. It's practicing being the person you're capable of becoming, someone who brings value to interactions rather than seeking to extract validation from them. As you embody this version of yourself, even briefly, you create new neural pathways that make this state more accessible over time. I want to be clear about something important. Self-sufficiency doesn't mean isolation or emotional detachment. The Stoics weren't advocating for a life of solitude. They were deeply engaged in their communities and relationships. What they understood was the difference between healthy interdependence, connecting from a place of wholeness, and unhealthy dependence, seeking others to fill an internal void. Think about the most magnetically attractive people you know. Aren't they often those who have rich, full lives of their own? They're interested in you, but not desperate for you. They bring their own energy, ideas, and presence to interactions, rather than expecting you to provide all the value. This quality isn't something they're born with. It's something they've cultivated through precisely the practices we're discussing. I'd like to introduce you to an exercise I call the complete day. Choose one day this week to live as if you were already completely self-sufficient, as if your sense of worth and fulfillment were entirely generated from within rather than dependent on others' responses. Throughout this day, notice when you feel the pull to check if someone has messaged you, to seek approval for something you've done, or to adjust your behavior to win someone's validation. Each time you notice this pull, gently redirect your attention to something within your control that brings you genuine fulfillment. This practice isn't about ignoring others or being selfish. It's about approaching relationships from a place of generosity rather than need. When you're not desperately seeking to get something from others, you can focus on what you have to offer instead. This shift from taking to giving transforms the entire quality of your interactions. Remember, self-sufficiency is not an all-or-nothing state. It's a muscle that strengthens with practice. Some days you'll feel more internally resourced than others, and that's perfectly normal. What matters is the overall direction of your development. Are you becoming more or less dependent on external validation over time? As you develop greater self-sufficiency, you'll notice subtle but profound changes in how others respond to you. Messages that once went unanswered now receive prompt replies. People who seemed disinterested suddenly want to spend time with you. Opportunities that weren't available before mysteriously appear. This isn't magic. It's the natural result of no longer approaching interactions with the energetic signature of neediness. A client once described this transformation as the strangest experience of my life. It was like everyone could smell the difference in me. I wasn't doing anything differently in terms of my actions. I was just coming from a completely different internal place, and suddenly everyone was responding to me differently. This internal shift affects your external presentation in ways you might not realize. When you're seeking validation, your voice often rises in pitch, your speaking pace increases, your eye contact becomes anxious and searching, and your body language becomes tense. These are submissive signals that others process subconsciously. But when you're operating from self-sufficiency, your voice naturally deepens, your pace slows, your eye contact becomes steady and comfortable, and your body language opens and relaxes. These are the natural signals of someone who knows their own worth. Let me offer a practical way to develop self-sufficiency in 3 key areas of life. First, cultivate meaningful activities that bring you genuine fulfillment, independent of others' recognition. This might be creative expression, learning, physical movement, nature connection, or spiritual practice. The specific activity matters less than your relationship to it. Are you doing it for internal satisfaction or external validation? Second, develop a diverse portfolio of connections rather than placing all your emotional eggs in one basket. Commit to nurturing at least 3 different types of social connection this week, perhaps reconnecting with an old friend, contributing to a community group, or deepening a family relationship. Third, practice receiving validation without becoming dependent on it. When someone compliments you or shows interest in you, enjoy it fully without needing more of it. Think of it like sunshine. Wonderful when it's present, but not something you panic about when clouds appear. As you implement these practices, you'll gradually develop what the Stoics considered the foundation of a good life. the ability to find joy and meaning regardless of external circumstances. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to relationships. It means bringing your full, complete self to them rather than expecting them to complete you. Remember that this development isn't linear. There will be days when you slip back into validation-seeking behaviors. When that happens, respond with self-compassion rather than self-criticism. Notice the behavior. Remind yourself of your commitment to self-sufficiency and gently redirect your attention to what you control. Each time you make this shift, you strengthen the neural pathways of emotional independence. The beauty of self-sufficiency is that it creates a virtuous cycle. The less you need others' validation, the more naturally attractive you become. The more attractive you become, the more validation naturally flows to you. The more validation flows to you, the easier it becomes to hold it lightly rather than grasping desperately for it. This upward spiral begins with the simple but profound decision to build a life that feels complete regardless of any single person's response to you. Self-sufficiency creates a magnetic presence, but the Stoics knew that we need something deeper, clear values that guide our decisions. Epictetus was willing to be considered foolish and stupid to remain true to his principles. This way of living, which I'll share next, creates a quiet dignity that others find irresistibly attractive. Have you ever met someone with a quiet dignity that simply commanded respect? Not through intimidation or flashy displays, but through an unshakable sense of who they are and what they stand for. These rare individuals possess something that most people find deeply attractive: a clear sense of personal values that guides their decisions regardless of external pressures. Epictetus, who rose from slavery to become one of history's most influential philosophers, captured this quality perfectly when he said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things." What a radical statement! He's telling us that true strength comes not from winning everyone's approval, but from being willing to be misunderstood or even disliked if it means staying true to what we believe is right. This isn't about being stubborn or contrarian for its own sake. It's about something much deeper, developing what I call values-based living. When you clarify your core values and make decisions based on those values rather than on others' reactions or approval, you develop a kind of magnetic authenticity that others find compelling even when they disagree with you. Think about people you deeply respect. Aren't they often individuals who stand by their principles even when it's unpopular? There's something inherently attractive about someone who knows what they stand for and doesn't constantly shift their position based on who they're trying to impress. Let's make this practical with an exercise I call values clarification. Take 30 seconds right now, actually pause the video, and ask yourself, what are 3 principles that I want to guide my life regardless of whether they win me approval? Maybe it's honesty, courage, kindness, creativity, justice, or learning. Whatever comes to mind, these are clues to your core values. Now here's where most people go wrong. They have these values in their head, but their actions tell a completely different story. They value honesty, but tell small lies to make themselves look better. They value courage, but remain silent when speaking up matters. They value learning, but never push themselves beyond their comfort zone. This inconsistency between declared values and actual behavior creates inner conflict that others can sense, even if they can't name it. It undermines your presence and authenticity. The Stoics understood that true integrity means alignment between your inner commitments and your outer actions. Let me introduce a simple but powerful test, the consistency test. Think about a recent interaction where you were seeking someone's approval. Did your behavior in that moment align with your core values, or did you compromise them to win validation? Be brutally honest with yourself. This awareness is the first step toward developing the kind of integrity that naturally draws others to you. The key Stoic insight here is that making decisions based on values rather than on potential reactions creates a freedom that most people never experience. Most of us are constantly calculating, how will this person respond if I say this? Will they approve if I do that? This creates a mental prison where we're forever adjusting ourselves to win others' validation. But when you make decisions based on, is this aligned with my values, rather than, will this win approval? You experience a profound liberation. Your actions become consistent and authentic rather than scattered and performative. And this authenticity is precisely what creates magnetic attraction. I remember working with Ricardo, a team leader who was constantly seeking his manager's approval. In every meeting, he would scan his manager's face for reactions, adjust his opinions to match what he thought his manager wanted to hear, and feel devastated when his contributions weren't acknowledged. His entire leadership approach was based on winning approval rather than on what he actually believed was right. After learning about values-based living, Ricardo identified his core leadership values: honesty, collaboration, and excellence. He committed to making decisions based on these values rather than on his manager's potential reactions. The transformation was remarkable. In one particularly challenging meeting, the team was discussing a project approach that Ricardo believed was fundamentally flawed. In the past, he would have stayed silent or offered mild suggestions, fearing disapproval. Instead, he calmly but clearly explained why he thought the approach wouldn't work and offered an alternative that better aligned with the team's goals. There was a moment of uncomfortable silence, and Ricardo felt that familiar anxiety rising. Had he just destroyed his relationship with his manager? But then something unexpected happened. His manager thanked him for his honesty and asked him to elaborate on his alternative approach. By the end of the meeting, the team had adopted Ricardo's suggestions, and his manager pulled him aside to express appreciation for his candid input. The science of integrity helps explain why this approach works so powerfully. When your words align with your true thoughts and your actions align with your declared values, you create what psychologists call congruence, an internal-external alignment that reduces cognitive stress and increases personal power. This congruence is visible to others through subtle but important signals. Your voice becomes more resonant, your body language more open, your eye contact more steady. These are the natural expressions of someone who isn't wasting energy on the exhausting performance of trying to be whoever they think others want them to be. I'd like you to try an exercise right now that can be surprisingly revealing. Think of a recent situation where you compromised your values to win someone's approval. Maybe you agreed with an opinion you didn't actually share. Maybe you went along with a plan you didn't believe in. Maybe you stayed silent when your values called for you to speak up. Now reimagine that same situation, but this time picture yourself acting in complete alignment with your values, regardless of the potential for disapproval. How would you have spoken differently? What would your body language have communicated? How would it have felt internally to honor your principles, even if it meant not winning everyone's approval? This exercise isn't about beating yourself up for past choices. It's about recognizing the gap between values-aligned living and approval-seeking behavior so you can begin closing that gap going forward. A powerful practice for developing this skill is what I call values-aligned decision-making. Before any significant interaction, ask yourself, if I weren't concerned about this person's approval, what would I truthfully say or do in this situation based on my values? Then act according to that truth rather than according to what might win their validation. At first, this might feel frightening. We're so conditioned to seek approval that acting independently of that concern can trigger anxiety. But here's the paradox the Stoics understood. People actually respect you more when you remain true to your principles, even when they disagree with you. There's something compelling about someone who has the courage to stand by their convictions without being defensive or aggressive about it. Think about it from your own perspective. When someone is constantly shifting their opinions to match yours, don't you find it somewhat off-putting? But when someone thoughtfully disagrees with you based on clear principles, don't you find yourself more interested in what they have to say, even if you don't share their view? This is the magnetic quality of values-based living. It doesn't make everyone agree with you. It doesn't win universal approval, but it creates a kind of authentic presence that naturally commands respect and interest. An important clarification: values-based living isn't about being rigid or judging others. The Stoics emphasized virtues like justice and temperance, but they also valued practical wisdom, understanding that principles must be applied thoughtfully in complex situations. Values provide guidance, not simplistic rules. Let's make this even more concrete with another practice: developing your personal code. Take a few minutes later today to write down your answers to these questions. What are lines I won't cross, regardless of potential benefits? What principles will guide my decisions, even when adhering to them might cost me someone's approval? This personal code becomes a North Star that guides your decisions when the pull of external validation is strong. Instead of constantly recalculating based on others' reactions, you have clear internal guidance that creates consistency in your actions. The beauty of values-based living is that it simplifies decision-making. Instead of the exhausting calculus of what will make this person like me, or what will win approval in this situation, you simply ask, what action best aligns with my values? This clarity creates a calm confidence that others can sense immediately. A common concern that arises when people begin practicing values-based living is, won't this make me seem arrogant or inflexible? The key lies in how you communicate your values-based positions. It's entirely possible to stand firmly in your principles while remaining open, respectful, and kind toward others. Instead of saying, "That's wrong and I would never do that," you might say, "Based on what matters most to me, I see this differently." Instead of rigid proclamations, you offer clear perspective grounded in principles. This approach communicates both conviction and respect. I'd like to suggest a daily practice that can strengthen your values-based living muscle. Before each significant interaction today, take 10 seconds to remind yourself of one core value that matters to you. Maybe it's honesty, courage, kindness, or fairness. Bring that value consciously to mind and let it guide how you show up in that interaction. Notice how this small practice changes the quality of your presence. When you're grounded in values rather than anxiously monitoring for approval, you bring a different energy to conversations. You listen more attentively because you're not constantly calculating your next move to win validation. You speak more authentically because you're expressing genuine conviction rather than manufactured agreement. One participant in our program described this transformation. "It's like I stopped being a weather vane, constantly shifting with whatever wind was blowing. Instead, I became a compass. I still respond to my environment, but I have a consistent orientation regardless of external pressures." As you develop this practice, you'll find yourself naturally attracting people who respect authenticity and gradually releasing relationships based on performance and validation seeking. This doesn't mean you'll lose important connections. Often, relationships actually deepen when you show up more authentically. But the dynamics shift from seeking approval to sharing genuine connection. The ultimate test of values-based living is how you respond when adhering to your principles puts you at odds with someone whose approval you desire. This is when the rubber meets the road. Can you maintain your commitment to your values, even when it means potentially disappointing someone important to you? The Stoics would argue that this is precisely when your values matter most. As Seneca wrote, "The person who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The person who walks alone is likely to find themselves in places no one has ever been before. There are moments when standing by your principles means standing alone, at least temporarily. But it's in these moments that you develop the kind of authentic presence that ultimately attracts the right people to you. Remember, values-based living doesn't mean you'll never compromise or consider others' perspectives. The Stoics valued practical wisdom alongside other virtues. But it does mean that your compromises come from thoughtful consideration of competing values, not from desperate attempts to win approval. As you continue developing this practice, you'll notice something remarkable. The anxiety of constantly monitoring others' reactions begins to fade. In its place emerges a steady confidence that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for, regardless of external validation. Living by your values creates a magnetic authenticity, but the Stoics discovered something equally powerful: the quality of presence. Seneca observed that most people live in the past or the future, rarely in the present. This capacity to be fully present, which I'll teach you now, is increasingly rare in our distracted world, making it extraordinarily valuable and attractive. You know that feeling when someone is truly listening to you, not just waiting for their turn to speak. That rare quality of complete attention that makes you feel truly seen and valued. In our hyper-connected yet paradoxically disconnected world, this capacity for genuine presence has become increasingly scarce, and therefore increasingly precious. Seneca, one of Rome's greatest philosophers, observed that most people's anxiety stems from living either in the past or the future instead of the present moment. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, he wrote, recognizing that our minds constantly pull us away from the only moment we can actually experience, right now. Think about your own daily experience. How many times have you been physically present in a conversation while your mind was elsewhere, perhaps rehearsing what you'll say next, worrying about an earlier mistake, or planning your evening? We've all done this, and we've all felt when someone is doing it to us. This mental absence is particularly pronounced in our digital age. Research shows the average person checks their phone 150 times per day. That's roughly once every 6 minutes of waking life. Each check pulls us from the present moment, fragmenting our attention and diminishing our capacity for deep connection. The Stoics understood that presence, what they called prosos or attention, was not just a nice quality, but essential to a well-lived life. For them, being fully engaged with the present moment was the only way to exercise wisdom and virtue, since the past and future exist only in our minds. I'd like you to try a simple experiment right now. For just 30 seconds, give your complete attention to your breathing. Notice the sensation of air entering and leaving your body. When your mind wanders, which it inevitably will, gently bring it back to your breath without judgment. Try this now. I'll wait. This brief exercise demonstrates both how difficult and how refreshing true presence can be. Most people find their mind wandered several times in just 30 seconds, a humbling revelation about our capacity for sustained attention. But you likely also experienced a moment of clarity and calm when you were fully present, even if briefly. This capacity for focused attention is what I call present moment immersion, and it's a foundational Stoic practice that creates natural magnetic attraction. When you're fully engaged in the present moment, you naturally stop obsessing about whether someone will text you back or what they might think of you. This liberation from future-oriented anxiety creates a calm confidence that others find compelling. In practical terms, present moment immersion means that when you're with someone, be fully with them, listening attentively, responding authentically, not checking your phone or scanning the room for someone more important. And when you're alone, be fully engaged in whatever you're doing rather than anxiously waiting for validation from others. One powerful practice for developing this quality is what I call deep listening. The next time you're in conversation, challenge yourself to listen so attentively that you could accurately summarize the other person's perspective back to them. Not just their words, but the feelings and values behind those words. This isn't waiting for your turn to speak. It's genuinely seeking to understand. When you listen this way, something remarkable happens. The other person feels truly seen and valued, often for the first time in a long while. This creates a powerful connection that no amount of clever conversation or impression management could achieve. And paradoxically, by focusing your attention entirely on them rather than on how you're being perceived, you become more attractive in their eyes. Mariana learned this lesson through a surprising experience. She had always been known as a brilliant conversationalist, quick with clever responses and interesting stories. But she noticed that despite these qualities, her relationships often remained superficial. After learning about present moment immersion, she committed to a radical experiment. In every conversation for 1 week, she would focus entirely on understanding the other person before sharing her own thoughts. The transformation was profound. Not only did she develop deeper connections, but people began seeking her out. "There's something different about talking with you," one colleague told her. "I feel like you really see me." This quality of presence had created a magnetic attraction that all her clever conversation skills never could. The neuroscience behind this phenomenon is fascinating. When you make genuine eye contact and give someone your full attention, your brain releases oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, which creates feelings of trust and connection. Their brain mirrors this response, creating a neurochemical synchronization that feels, quite literally, like connection. But this quality of presence isn't just about how you interact with others. It's also about how you engage with your own experience. The Stoics practiced what they called prososton fantasion, or attention to impressions, the habit of noticing their own reactions to events without being carried away by them. I'd like to suggest a practical challenge. For the next 24 hours, commit to no phone during meals or conversations. This simple boundary creates space for genuine presence. Notice how it feels different, perhaps uncomfortable at first, but ultimately more satisfying. Notice how others respond to your undivided attention. Of course, remaining present isn't always easy, especially when you're feeling anxious about how you're being perceived. In these moments, the Stoic technique of anchoring can be invaluable. Choose a physical sensation, perhaps your feet on the ground or your breath in your body, that can serve as an anchor when anxiety pulls you into future-oriented thinking. By returning your attention to this physical anchor, you reconnect with the present moment and interrupt the spiral of validation-seeking thoughts. Here's a simple test to gauge your capacity for presence in conversations. After an interaction, can you recall the last 3 points the other person made? Not just the general topic, but the specific content of what they shared. If not, it's likely your attention was divided between listening to them and monitoring how you were being perceived. Another powerful practice for developing present moment immersion is what I call the total immersion exercise. Choose one activity each day, perhaps walking, eating, or even washing dishes, and commit to experiencing it with your full attention for just 5 minutes. Notice the sensory details, the physical sensations, the thoughts that arise and pass. This seemingly simple practice strengthens your neural pathways for sustained attention, making presence more accessible in all situations, including social ones. What's fascinating is how directly this quality of presence counteracts the needy behaviors that repel others. When you're fully engaged in the present moment, you naturally stop checking your phone for responses. You stop scanning the room for better options during conversations. You stop calculating how each word might affect your status. These validation-seeking behaviors dissolve not through force of will, but as the natural result of being fully here now. A powerful way to demonstrate presence in conversations is through what I call present questions. Inquiries that show you're truly listening rather than waiting to speak. Instead of generic questions or those designed to showcase your knowledge, ask about specific details the person has shared. You mentioned feeling conflicted about that decision. What was the hardest part for you? Questions like this demonstrate that you're not just hearing their words, but genuinely engaging with their experience. I remember working with a client who struggled with social anxiety. He was constantly monitoring how others were perceiving him, which ironically made him seem distracted and uninterested. After practicing present moment immersion for several weeks, he had a revelation. When I stop worrying about whether they like me and just focus completely on understanding them, I actually enjoy conversations. And strangely, people seem to like me more, even though I'm thinking about them instead of myself. This points to a fascinating paradox. The way to become more attractive is often to think less about how attractive you're being. When your attention is fully engaged with the person or activity before you, rather than split between the present and anxious projections about the future, you naturally exhibit the kind of grounded confidence that others find compelling. The quality of presence also creates a critical shift in your relationship dynamics. When you're fully present, you're able to respond to what's actually happening rather than to your projections, assumptions, or fears. This responsiveness, as opposed to reactivity, allows you to navigate conversations with a kind of grace that comes only from being fully in the moment. Let me suggest one more practice that can develop your capacity for presence: the 5 senses check-in. Whenever you notice yourself becoming anxious about external validation, perhaps before an important meeting or social gathering, take 30 seconds to notice one thing you can see, one thing you can hear, one thing you can feel, one thing you can smell, and one thing you can taste. This simple practice immediately brings you back to the present moment, interrupting the future-oriented anxiety that drives validation-seeking behavior. As you develop greater capacity for presence, you'll notice subtle but important changes in how others respond to you. Conversations become deeper and more meaningful. People remember interactions with you more vividly. You receive more invitations, more interest, more engagement, not because you're seeking these things, but precisely because you're not. This quality of full engagement with the present is increasingly rare in our distracted age, which makes it increasingly valuable. In a world where most people are perpetually divided between physical presence and mental absence, the person who brings their full attention to each moment stands out dramatically. The Stoics understood that presence isn't just a nice quality, it's essential to a well-lived life. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Give yourself a gift, the present moment." When you're fully engaged with what's before you, whether a person, a task, or even a challenge, you access a kind of power that's unavailable to the distracted mind. The practice of present moment immersion creates profound benefits beyond just making you more attractive to others. It reduces anxiety by keeping your mind from projecting fearful futures. It increases enjoyment of daily life by allowing you to fully experience simple pleasures. It improves performance by channeling your full cognitive resources to the task at hand. But perhaps most importantly, it allows you to actually live your life rather than mentally rehearsing for a future that never arrives or rehashing a past that cannot be changed. The Stoics recognize that our time is finite and precious. To spend it mentally absent from the only moment we can actually experience, this present moment, is to miss our lives entirely. As you continue developing present moment immersion, remember that like any skill, presence takes practice. There will be times when you find yourself pulled into validation-seeking thoughts or future-oriented anxiety. When that happens, simply notice it without judgment and gently return your attention to the present moment. Each time you make this shift, you strengthen the neural pathways of presence. Presence creates deep connections, but it needs to be combined with emotional independence. Now let's integrate everything we've learned into a practical system, the 21-day Stoic Independence Protocol. This specific sequence, starting with the exercise I'll share now, will create new neural pathways that make emotional independence your natural state, not something you need to strive for. Imagine waking up 21 days from now as a completely different person, someone naturally magnetic who doesn't desperately chase validation, someone who attracts the right people effortlessly. This transformation isn't just a nice idea. It's a systematic process that the ancient Stoics understood intuitively and that we can implement through daily practices designed to rewire your neural pathways. The 21-day Stoic Independence Protocol isn't about quick fixes or manipulation tactics. It's about fundamentally changing your relationship with external validation through consistent practice. Think of it like training a muscle. Each repetition strengthens your emotional independence until it becomes your default state, rather than something you're striving for. Let's break down exactly what you'll be doing in this first week to establish the foundation of your transformation. Don't just listen passively. I want you to commit to implementing these practices starting today, even if they feel uncomfortable at first. Remember, the discomfort is a sign that you're disrupting old patterns and creating new ones. Day 1 begins with what I call the 3-day indifference challenge. Choose one relationship where you've been the pursuer, whether romantic, friendship, or professional. And for just 3 days, practice what the Stoics called philosophical indifference. This isn't cold detachment. It's a calm acceptance that you'll be perfectly fine regardless of this person's response to you. For these first 3 days, commit to no checking if they've read your message, no initiating contact, no social media monitoring of their activity, no adjusting your schedule in hopes of running into them. I know this might feel almost impossible right now. You might be thinking, but if I don't reach out, they'll forget about me. This fear comes from what the Stoics called a false impression, a misinterpretation of reality. The truth is that your constant pursuit is likely creating pressure that subtly pushes them away rather than drawing them closer. A participant in our program described her experience with the 3-day indifference challenge. The first day was torture. I kept reaching for my phone automatically. By the 3rd day, I noticed something strange. I wasn't thinking about checking nearly as much. And then something even stranger happened. He texted me, wondering why he hadn't heard from me. While this positive response is common, remember that it's not the goal. The goal is developing independence from external validation, not manipulating others into giving you more attention. If they don't reach out during these 3 days, that's valuable information, and you'll be developing the emotional resilience to handle it with dignity. On day 1, you'll also begin the self-worth inventory exercise. Take a piece of paper, pause the video right now and actually get paper and pen, and draw a line down the middle. On the left side, write down all the things that make you valuable that have nothing to do with other people's opinions or attention. These might include your character qualities, skills, values, and contributions. On the right side, write down activities that make you feel fulfilled, independent of external validation. These might include creative pursuits, learning experiences, physical activities, or meaningful service to others. This inventory becomes your resource guide for redirecting energy that would otherwise go into validation-seeking behaviors. Now commit to spending at least 30 minutes each day on one of those self-worth activities. This isn't just a distraction technique. It's actively creating what psychologists call non-contingent self-esteem, a sense of worth that doesn't depend on others' responses. Each time you engage in these activities, you're strengthening neural pathways that associate fulfillment with internal factors rather than external validation. On day 4, after completing the 3-day indifference challenge, you'll create what I call a premeditatio journal. This practice comes directly from the Stoic technique of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of difficulties. Seneca practiced this each morning, and modern psychology confirms its effectiveness in reducing anxiety. In your premeditatio journal, write down your worst fears about what might happen if you stop pursuing someone's approval. What's the worst that could happen? They might ignore you. They might think less of you. They might choose someone else. Write these fears down in detail, then mentally rehearse facing those scenarios with dignity. This practice might seem counterintuitive. Won't focusing on negative possibilities make you more anxious? Actually, research shows the opposite. By consciously processing these fears, rather than letting them operate beneath your awareness, you reduce their power to control your behavior. This is what Epictetus meant when he said, "Make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, 'You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be.'" On day 5, you'll begin implementing the preemptive acceptance meditation, a 5-minute daily practice where you calmly imagine various scenarios of being overlooked or rejected, while reminding yourself that your worth remains completely intact, regardless of these outcomes. Here's a simple script to follow. Close your eyes. Take 3 deep breaths. Bring to mind a specific situation where you're seeking someone's approval or response. Now, imagine them not giving you the response you want. Feel the initial emotional response in your body. Then visualize these feelings subsiding as you remember your inherent worth. See yourself responding with complete dignity, continuing with your meaningful life. This meditation literally rewires your brain's threat response. When you repeatedly visualize handling rejection with equanimity, you create new neural pathways that process potential rejection as manageable rather than catastrophic. This doesn't just reduce anxiety, it transforms how you show up in interactions, creating a natural confidence that others find attractive. On day 6, you'll begin implementing the dichotomy of control in your daily interactions. Remember, this fundamental Stoic principle distinguishes between what you control, your thoughts, actions, responses, and what you don't control, others' reactions, opinions, decisions about you. Before each significant interaction on day 6, take 10 seconds to remind yourself, "I control my authenticity, attention, and effort. I don't control how others respond." This brief reminder shifts your focus from outcome to process, from trying to manage others' impressions to simply bringing your best self to each moment. A helpful metaphor here is thinking of your attention as a spotlight. You can direct it either toward what you control, creating clarity and empowerment, or toward what you don't control, creating anxiety and neediness. Each time you consciously redirect your spotlight toward what you control, you strengthen the neural pathways of emotional independence. On day 7, you'll complete your first week with a review session. Take 15 minutes to reflect on which validation-seeking behaviors have decreased during this week and which still feel challenging. Notice any shifts in how you're feeling and how others are responding to you. This reflection isn't about judging yourself, but about gathering data that will guide your practice in week 2. Many participants report significant changes even after this first week. One described it this way: "I noticed I'm standing taller. My voice feels more grounded. I'm making better eye contact. And strangely, people seem more interested in what I have to say, even though I'm actually talking less and listening more." These physical changes aren't coincidental. When you stop outsourcing your worth to others' opinions, your nervous system naturally shifts from a state of anxious arousal to calm confidence. This shift manifests in your posture, voice quality, facial expressions, and overall presence, all signals that others unconsciously register and respond to. Of course, you might face challenges during this first week. You might find yourself automatically checking your phone or slipping back into people-pleasing behaviors. When this happens, respond with self-compassion rather than criticism. Each time you notice yourself seeking validation, it's an opportunity to redirect your attention to what you control, a repetition that strengthens your emotional independence muscle. Some participants worry that practicing indifference means they'll end up alone. But remember what Marcus Aurelius wrote. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. None of them can hurt me. No one can implicate me in ugliness. This isn't about becoming cold or detached from others. It's about connecting from a place of wholeness rather than neediness, a distinction that actually creates deeper, more authentic relationships. The first week of the protocol focuses on establishing the neural foundation of emotional independence. You're essentially creating new pathways in your brain that associate well-being with internal factors rather than external validation. This foundation is crucial for the more advanced practices we'll implement in week 2. Think of it like learning any new skill. At first, it requires conscious effort and frequent correction. But with consistent practice, it begins to feel more natural. By the end of this first week, many participants report that checking their phone less frequently or not immediately adjusting their opinion to match someone else's starts to feel normal rather than requiring constant vigilance. If you're finding the practices particularly challenging, remember what Epictetus taught. No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me that you desire a fig, I answer that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen. Your transformation won't happen overnight, but each day of practice brings you closer to the natural state of emotional independence. As you complete this first week, take a moment to acknowledge your commitment to this process. Even recognizing that your relationship with external validation needs to change represents significant growth. Many people spend their entire lives caught in the validation trap without ever questioning it. You're already taking steps toward a fundamentally different way of relating to yourself and others. In the first week, you've established the neurological foundations of emotional independence. Now we move to the part where we truly transform how you interact with others. The Aurelius pause, a 3-breath technique that Marcus Aurelius practiced before each social interaction, will be your most powerful tool for the next phase. Let's discover how to implement it and what it will do for your magnetic presence. You know that feeling when you're so centered that other people's reactions don't shake your inner peace. That quiet confidence that comes from being rooted in your own worth rather than constantly seeking external validation. This is what we're building toward in our second week of the Stoic Independence Protocol. Before we dive in, let's quickly review what we established in the first week. You've built the foundation by implementing the 3-day indifference challenge, created your self-worth inventory, started your pre-meditatio journal, and begun practicing the dichotomy of control in daily interactions. These practices have already started creating new neural pathways, shifting your brain's reward system away from external validation and toward internal fulfillment. Now we're ready for the transformation phase. This is where your interactions with others begin to change in noticeable ways. And it all starts with a powerful technique I call the Aurelius pause, named after Marcus Aurelius, who used a similar practice before engaging with the countless people demanding his attention each day. Here's how it works. When you notice yourself slipping into validation-seeking behavior, maybe you're about to check if someone read your message for the 5th time, or you're tempted to change your opinion to match someone influential, pause and take 3 conscious breaths. During these breaths, silently repeat this reminder. The person who needs constant validation from others gives away their power to everyone but themselves. This brief intervention creates a critical space between stimulus and response. As Viktor Frankl, who was deeply influenced by Stoic philosophy, noted, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response." The Aurelius pause activates that space, allowing you to redirect your attention from seeking validation to reconnecting with your inner worth. Let's practice this right now. Think of a recent situation where you found yourself anxiously seeking someone's approval. Maybe checking your phone repeatedly after sending an important message, or feeling that knot in your stomach when someone important to you seemed distant. Now, take 3 slow, deep breaths while silently repeating, "The person who needs constant validation from others gives away their power to everyone but themselves." Notice how this creates a subtle shift in your perspective, a little more space between you and that anxious need for approval. On days 8 through 10, we'll implement what I call the dichotomy redirection practice. Every time you catch yourself focusing on something outside your control, like whether someone responds to your message or appreciates your contribution, consciously transfer your attention to something within your control. This mental transfer creates a new neural pathway that breaks the habit of emotional dependency. For example, instead of, "Why haven't they texted me back?" Uncontrollable. Shift to, "I'll focus on this interesting project while I wait." Controllable. Instead of, "Do they think I'm good enough?" Uncontrollable. Shift to, "I'll bring my authentic best to this interaction." Controllable. A client once told me how this practice transformed a challenging social situation. She was at a gathering where someone she admired seemed uninterested in speaking with her. In the past, this would have sent her into a spiral of self-doubt and desperate attempts to win attention. Instead, she implemented the dichotomy redirection practice, shifting her focus from, "Why aren't they interested in me?" to, "How can I be genuinely present with whoever I'm speaking to right now?" The result was remarkable. Not only did she have several meaningful conversations with others, but toward the end of the event, the person she had initially sought validation from actually approached her. "You seem different from most people here," they commented. "Everyone's networking, but you seem genuinely interested in the people you're talking to." This transformation wasn't about employing a clever tactic to win attention. It was about genuinely releasing the need for specific validation and redirecting that energy toward what she actually controlled, her authentic presence in each interaction. On day 11, we deepen our practice with the daily preemptive acceptance meditation. This 5-minute morning routine prepares your mind to remain centered, regardless of how others respond to you throughout the day. It's like psychological vaccination. By mentally rehearsing potential rejection while maintaining your sense of worth, you become increasingly immune to the destabilizing effects of actual rejection. Here's a simple guide. Find a quiet place to sit comfortably. Close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths. Bring to mind a specific person whose approval or response you're concerned about today. Now, imagine them not giving you the response you want. See it clearly. The unanswered message, the lukewarm reaction, whatever form rejection might take in this situation. Notice the initial feelings that arise, perhaps tightness in your chest or a sinking feeling in your stomach. Don't fight these sensations. Simply observe them with curiosity. Then, imagine these feelings gradually subsiding as you remember your inherent worth. Visualize yourself responding to this scenario with complete dignity, not with desperate attempts to win approval, but with calm self-possession. Finally, see yourself continuing with your meaningful life, recognizing that this person's response doesn't define your value. Open your eyes and carry this centered perspective into your day. One participant described the effects of this practice. After 2 weeks, I noticed that situations that would have devastated me before, like someone not responding to my message, now felt like minor disappointments rather than existential threats. I still preferred positive responses, of course, but I no longer felt my worth was on the line with each interaction. On days 12 and 13, we implement perhaps the most transformative practice of all: values-aligned decision-making. Before any significant social interaction, ask yourself, if I weren't concerned about this person's approval, what would I truthfully say or do in this situation based on my values? Then, act according to that truth rather than according to what might win their validation. This practice creates authenticity that others can sense immediately and are naturally drawn to. Think about your own experience. When someone is constantly monitoring your reactions and adjusting themselves to please you, don't you sense something subtly inauthentic about the interaction? But when someone speaks and acts from clear principles, even if you disagree with them, don't you find yourself respecting their integrity? I challenge you to identify 3 situations this week where you can practice this values-aligned approach. Perhaps it's expressing an honest opinion in a meeting rather than saying what you think will be popular. Maybe it's setting a boundary with someone when you'd normally accommodate them to win approval. Or it could be pursuing a project you genuinely believe in rather than one that might impress others. Each time you choose values over validation, you strengthen what psychologists call your internal locus of evaluation, your capacity to assess your worth based on your own standards rather than others' reactions. This internal reference point is the foundation of genuine confidence and magnetic presence. On day 14, take time for a thorough review of your second week. Notice how your interactions have begun to take on a different quality. You're likely speaking more directly, listening more attentively, and feeling less anxious about managing others' impressions of you. These subtle shifts create a fundamentally different energetic signature that others can sense, even if they can't articulate what's changed. Many participants report that by the end of the second week, they begin receiving more texts, more interest, more engagement. Not because they're pursuing it, but precisely because they're not. One person described it as the strangest experience. The less I chased people's attention, the more freely they gave it to me. The neuroscience behind this transformation is fascinating. When you practice emotional independence, your brain reduces production of cortisol, the stress hormone, and increases production of serotonin and oxytocin, creating a natural confidence and openness that others can sense through subtle cues in your facial expressions, voice tonality, and body language. Think about how a truly confident person enters a room, not with arrogance or a need to be noticed, but with a calm self-assurance that naturally draws attention. This is the presence you're developing through these practices. It's not about adding something to yourself, but about removing the anxious need for validation that has been obscuring your natural attractiveness. A common challenge during this second week is the fear that practicing emotional independence means becoming cold or detached. Let me be clear, this isn't about caring less about others. It's about caring less about controlling their responses to you. In fact, when you're not anxiously monitoring others' reactions, you can be more genuinely present with them, creating deeper, more authentic connections. As Epictetus taught, make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, "You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be." He wasn't suggesting we become indifferent to others, but that we learn to distinguish between people themselves, whom we can genuinely care about, and our impressions about their judgments of us, which often cause unnecessary suffering. Another challenge you might face is impatience. You might think, I've been practicing for almost 2 weeks. Why am I still feeling anxious about validation sometimes? Remember what Seneca wrote, "No man becomes brave by being brave once. We are built the way we repeatedly act." Transformation isn't an event. It's a process of consistently practicing new patterns until they become your default way of being. By the end of the second week, you should notice several key signs of progress. You check your phone less frequently, you speak more directly about your true thoughts, you feel less devastated when someone doesn't respond as you'd hoped. You find yourself more genuinely interested in others rather than focused on how they're perceiving you. These shifts might seem subtle, but they represent a fundamental change in your relationship with external validation. You're no longer approaching others from a place of lack, hoping they'll fill some void in you. Instead, you're bringing your complete self to each interaction, and this completeness is inherently attractive. As you move into the third and final week of the protocol, remember that this journey isn't about perfection. There will still be moments when you slip back into old patterns of validation seeking. The difference is that you now have the awareness to recognize these patterns and the tools to redirect your attention. In the second week, you've transformed your social interactions. Now, in the final phase, we'll integrate these practices until they become your natural state of being. The strategy of diversification of the relationship portfolio, a concept that the Stoics understood intuitively, will be crucial in this phase. This practice, which I'll explain now, creates an emotional resilience that makes you naturally attractive without any effort. Imagine interacting with everyone around you from a quiet confidence that comes from within. Not the nervous energy of someone seeking approval, but the centered presence of someone who knows their worth. This is what the final week of our Stoic Independence Protocol is designed to cultivate. By now, you've established the foundation in week 1 and transformed your social interactions in week 2. Now it's time to integrate these practices until they become your natural state of being. The key focus of this third week is making emotional independence your default setting, rather than something you have to consciously remember to practice. Think about learning to drive. At first, every action required intense concentration, but eventually, the movements became automatic. Similarly, we want these Stoic practices to become your automatic response in social situations. On days 15 and 16, we implement what I call the Relationship Portfolio Diversification Strategy. This concept may sound like financial advice, but it reflects a profound psychological insight that the Stoics understood intuitively. Just as investors shouldn't put all their money in one stock, we shouldn't invest all our emotional capital in any single relationship. Take a moment right now to mentally audit your emotional investments. Are you hyper-focused on one person's validation? Have you been neglecting other meaningful connections while pursuing someone's approval? This imbalance creates vulnerability, not just emotional vulnerability, but a magnetic deficit. When you need any specific person too much, that need creates a subtle repelling energy. For these 2 days, commit to nurturing at least 3 different social connections that you've been neglecting. This might mean reconnecting with a friend you haven't spoken to in a while, deepening a family relationship, or engaging more authentically with your community. The specific relationships matter less than the practice of distributing your emotional energy across multiple connections. One participant described her experience with this practice. I realized I'd been so focused on winning my boss's approval that I'd barely spoken to friends in weeks. When I reconnected with my broader social circle, something unexpected happened. I felt less desperate for my boss's validation. And strangely, that's when she started recognizing my contributions more. This isn't coincidental. When you diversify your relationship portfolio, you create emotional resilience that naturally reduces neediness in any single relationship. And as we've established throughout this protocol, reducing neediness creates magnetic attraction. On days 17 and 18, we implement what I call the contribution focus shift. This practice comes directly from Marcus Aurelius, who reminded himself, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. This perspective allowed Marcus to approach others with compassion rather than neediness, focusing not on what he could get from them, their approval, attention, validation, but on what value he could contribute regardless of their response. For these 2 days before each social interaction, ask yourself, what value can I bring to this exchange? Instead of, what can I get from this person? Or, how will they respond to me? This shift from taking to giving creates a natural confidence that comes from contribution rather than extraction. Think about how this might transform a typical conversation. Instead of monitoring the other person's reactions to see if they're impressed by you, you're fully focused on understanding them, adding value to their day, or sharing something that might genuinely benefit them. This contribution mindset naturally eliminates the anxious self-consciousness that makes so many interactions feel strained. A simple way to practice this is through what I call value-first messages. When reaching out to someone, rather than sending a message that requires something from them, their attention, response, validation, send something that provides value without expecting anything in return. This might be an article they'd find interesting, appreciation for something specific they've done, or an introduction that might benefit them. What's fascinating is how this contribution focus naturally makes you more attractive to others. People intuitively sense when you're trying to extract validation from them versus when you're focused on contributing value. The former creates subtle resistance. The latter creates openness and attraction. On days 19 and 20, implement what I call the Daily Dignity Review. Each evening, take 5 minutes to reflect on moments where you maintained your dignity by not chasing validation, as well as moments where you slipped back into old patterns. Without judgment, simply notice the difference in how these different approaches made you feel. This practice develops what the Stoics called prososche, mindful attention to your own thoughts and behaviors. As Epictetus taught his students, practice yourself for heaven's sake in little things, and thence proceed to greater. Each time you notice yourself acting from emotional independence rather than neediness, you reinforce that neural pathway, making it more likely to become your default response. The Daily Dignity Review also helps you identify specific triggers that still activate validation-seeking behavior. Maybe it's certain people, particular social settings, or specific types of interactions that tend to pull you back into old patterns. This awareness is powerful. Once you recognize these triggers, you can prepare specific responses that maintain your dignity even in challenging situations. One participant found that professional meetings were his biggest trigger for approval-seeking behavior. Through his Daily Dignity Review, he noticed he consistently abandoned his authentic perspective to align with the highest status person in the room. Once he recognized this pattern, he could prepare in advance, reminding himself before each meeting of his commitment to values-aligned contributions rather than approval-seeking performances. By day 21, these practices will have created new neural pathways that make emotional independence your default state rather than something you're striving for. On this final day, take time for a complete review of your 3-week journey. Notice how your relationship with external validation has shifted. Notice how others are responding to you differently. Notice how your internal experience has changed. Many participants report a profound sense of liberation by this point. As one person described it, "It's like I've been carrying a heavy backpack my whole life, constantly filled with concerns about what others think of me. The Stoic Independence Protocol helped me put down that backpack. I still care about others, but I'm no longer controlled by their opinions of me." This shift creates what psychologists call secure attachment, the capacity to form deep connections with others while maintaining a solid sense of self. You're not avoiding closeness, you're approaching it from wholeness rather than neediness. This is precisely what creates magnetic attraction in all types of relationships. Let me share a complete transformation story that illustrates the power of this protocol. Michael had spent years trying to win his father's approval, constantly sharing his accomplishments, adjusting his career choices to match his father's values, and feeling crushed when his efforts weren't acknowledged. His entire sense of worth had become dependent on his father's validation. After implementing the Stoic Independence Protocol, Michael stopped seeking his father's validation and instead pursued the career he genuinely felt called to. He communicated with his father without the desperate need for approval, simply sharing his life as one adult to another. When his father expressed disappointment in his career choice, Michael was able to respond with calm dignity rather than defensive justification or desperate attempts to change his mind. 6 months later, his father called him. "I've been thinking," he said, "and I want you to know how much I respect the path you've chosen. There's a confidence about you now that wasn't there before." The validation Michael had spent years pursuing came naturally when he stopped needing it. This illustrates what the Stoics understood intuitively and what modern psychology confirms empirically. The things we chase often run from us, while the things we don't need often come to us naturally. By developing emotional independence, you become naturally magnetic to others. As you complete the 21 days, remember that this isn't the end, but a beginning. You've established new patterns that will continue to develop as you practice them. There will still be moments when you slip back into validation-seeking behaviors. This is normal and human. The difference is that you now have the awareness to recognize these patterns and the tools to redirect your attention. A helpful practice for maintaining your progress is what I call the monthly independence reinforcement. On the first day of each month, revisit one of the key practices from the protocol, perhaps the preemptive acceptance meditation, the dichotomy redirection practice, or the contribution focus shift. This regular reinforcement prevents backsliding and deepens your emotional independence over time. Remember, this transformation isn't about becoming cold or detached from others. The Stoics were deeply engaged in their communities and relationships. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor, wrote extensively about his obligations to others and the importance of treating people with justice and kindness. What he and other Stoics understood was the difference between genuine connection, which comes from wholeness, and desperate attachment, which comes from neediness. As you move forward, you'll find that emotional independence actually allows for deeper connection with others. When you're not constantly monitoring their responses and seeking their validation, you can be fully present with them, listening attentively, responding authentically, and connecting from a place of genuine interest rather than desperate need. You've now completed the 21-day Stoic Independence Protocol, a systematic approach to developing the kind of magnetic presence that naturally attracts others without manipulation or games. You've established the foundation of emotional independence, transformed your social interactions, and integrated these practices until they've become part of who you are. After 21 days of Stoic practices, you've established new neurological patterns of emotional independence. But how exactly will your life be different going forward? How will your relationships, work, and emotional well-being change when you no longer depend on external validation? Let's explore the transformed life that awaits you when you fully embody the Stoic wisdom. Imagine waking up without that background anxiety about whether someone has responded to your message. Picture checking your phone when you choose to, not compulsively every few minutes. Think about expressing your authentic thoughts rather than calculating what might win approval. Envision making plans based on what genuinely interests you, not what might put you in proximity to someone whose validation you crave. This freedom, this profound sense of emotional liberation, is what awaits you on the other side of your Stoic journey. The first transformation most people notice after implementing the 21-day Stoic Independence Protocol is this remarkable sense of psychological space. It's as if a constant background noise has finally been silenced. That incessant chatter of, do they like me? What are they thinking? Why haven't they responded? When that noise fades, what emerges is what psychologists call psychological space. Room for your authentic self to emerge and express itself without constantly seeking external approval. One participant described this shift. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. I used to spend hours crafting the perfect message, then checking obsessively for a response. Now, I simply say what I think and let go of the outcome. The mental energy I've reclaimed is extraordinary. This freedom creates what the Stoics called euthymia, a state of tranquility that comes from living according to your own values rather than external expectations. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly when he wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Through the practices you've learned, you've developed precisely this power, the ability to revoke the excessive importance you've been giving to others' responses. Try something right now. Think about a recent situation where you were anxiously awaiting someone's validation, perhaps a message you sent or a contribution you made. Notice how different your relationship to that situation feels now compared to 3 weeks ago. There's likely a sense of perspective that wasn't there before, an understanding that while you might prefer a positive response, your worth doesn't depend on it. The second major transformation occurs in your social dynamics. When you no longer need others' validation, you paradoxically receive more of it. Research in social psychology consistently shows that neediness repels while self-sufficiency attracts. As you've implemented these Stoic practices, you've likely already noticed more people initiating contact with you, seeking your opinion and wanting to spend time with you. This isn't manipulation. It's a natural law of human interaction that the Stoics understood intuitively and that modern psychology has confirmed empirically. Seneca observed this phenomenon in ancient Rome. No one can be loved except by being free from need. He wasn't suggesting we become cold or detached. He was recognizing that genuine connection comes from wholeness, not from desperate attempts to fill an internal void. Think about your own experience with others. When someone is constantly seeking your approval, agreeing with everything you say, laughing a bit too enthusiastically at your jokes, checking your reaction to their every word, don't you feel a subtle pressure? There's something draining about interaction with someone who needs your validation that badly. Conversely, when you meet someone who enjoys your company but doesn't need your approval to feel complete, don't you find yourself more drawn to them, more curious about them, more eager to earn their attention? This shift in your social dynamics might initially feel strange. You might wonder, why is this person suddenly texting me when I stopped pursuing them? The answer lies in what the Stoics understood about human psychology. We value most what we cannot easily possess. By developing genuine emotional independence, you've become something rare and therefore precious. Someone whose validation isn't freely given out of neediness, but must be genuinely earned. The third major transformation occurs in your decision-making. When you're no longer making choices based on what might win someone's approval, you make choices aligned with your true values and interests. This creates a life that's authentically yours, rather than a performance designed to impress others. One participant described this shift. I used to exhaustively analyze every decision through the lens of, how will this make me look? Now I simply ask, is this aligned with my values? Does this contribute to a life I find meaningful? The simplicity is liberating, and strangely, people seem to respect my choices more, even when they differ from what they would choose. This values-based decision-making is what Epictetus was referring to when he advised, if you want to improve, Be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things. He wasn't advocating for foolishness, but for the courage to make decisions based on your own judgment rather than others' potential opinions. Take a moment right now to identify one decision you've been postponing or struggling with. How would you approach this decision if you were completely unconcerned with others' approval? What would you choose if you were focused solely on your values and what creates genuine fulfillment for you? This clarity is one of the most precious gifts of Stoic independence. The fourth transformation appears in your capacity for genuine connection. When you're desperately seeking validation, you're not actually connecting with the other person. You're connecting with your own need for their approval. But when you release that neediness, you can truly see and hear others for who they are rather than for what they can give you. This creates deeper, more meaningful relationships. You'll find yourself having conversations that go beyond surface-level pleasantries into genuine exchange of ideas and feelings. You'll develop connections based on mutual respect rather than validation seeking. A client once described this transformation. "I used to be so focused on making a good impression that I barely heard what others were saying. I was too busy planning my next impressive comment. Now that I'm not constantly seeking approval, I can actually listen. The conversations I'm having are so much more interesting and meaningful. I'm connecting with people in a way I never thought possible." This capacity for genuine connection comes from what the Stoics called sympathia, a recognition of our interconnectedness with others that doesn't require us to abandon our individual judgment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "We were born to work together, like feet, hands, and eyes, like the two rows of teeth, upper and lower." This perspective allows for deep connection without unhealthy dependency. The fifth transformation manifests in your resilience to rejection or disappointment. When someone doesn't respond to you or chooses not to engage with you, it no longer devastates you because your sense of worth isn't dependent on their response. You can think, "That's their choice and it's fine," and continue with your day unaffected. This resilience is profoundly liberating. As Epictetus taught, if a person gave your body to any stranger he met on his way, you would certainly be angry. And do you feel no shame in handing over your own mind to be confused and mystified by anyone who happens to verbally attack you? Think about how much power you've been giving to others when you allow their responses, or lack thereof, to determine your emotional state. Through the practices you've learned, you've reclaimed that power. You've developed what psychologists call emotional self-regulation, the ability to maintain your equilibrium regardless of external circumstances. Try this quick exercise. Recall a recent rejection or disappointment in your life. Notice how differently you relate to it now compared to 3 weeks ago. There's likely a sense of perspective that wasn't available to you before. An understanding that while rejection might be temporarily uncomfortable, it doesn't define your worth or determine your future happiness. The sixth and perhaps most profound transformation is in your overall sense of well-being. The Stoics called this eudaimonia, a state of flourishing that comes from living virtuously regardless of external circumstances. This is a deeper form of happiness than the fleeting pleasure of receiving someone's validation. It's a steady sense of dignity and purpose that remains with you regardless of how others respond to you. I want you to pause right now and imagine yourself having fully made this transformation. How would your posture be different? How would your voice sound different? How would your facial expressions change? Take a moment to embody that version of yourself, the version that is complete and dignified regardless of external validation. This embodiment practice actually creates neurological changes that help manifest that reality. As you physically experience what it feels like to be emotionally independent, your brain begins creating the neural pathways to make that your default state. It's what scientists call embodied cognition, the understanding that physical states influence mental states just as mental states influence physical ones. Now, I want to be clear about something important. This transformation isn't about becoming cold or detached from others. It's about connecting from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. You'll actually find yourself more capable of genuine love and friendship because you're no longer using others to fill an internal void. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." This perspective allows you to remain compassionate toward others without being dependent on their validation. One participant beautifully described this balance. "I used to think independence meant not caring about others. Now I realize true independence means caring deeply, but not being controlled by that caring. I'm more genuinely connected to people now than when I was desperately seeking their approval." Let me share one final transformation story that illustrates the long-term impact of these practices. A man had spent years trying to win his father's approval, constantly sharing his accomplishments, adjusting his career choices to match his father's values, and feeling crushed when his efforts weren't acknowledged. After implementing the Stoic independence protocol, he stopped seeking his father's validation and instead pursued the career he genuinely felt called to. He communicated with his father without the desperate need for approval, simply sharing his life as one adult to another. 6 months later, his father called him. "I've been thinking," he said, "and I want you to know how much I respect the path you've chosen. There's a confidence about you now that wasn't there before." The validation he had spent years pursuing came naturally when he stopped needing it. This is the paradoxical truth that Stoics understood. The things we chase often run from us, while the things we don't need often come to us naturally. By developing emotional independence, you become naturally magnetic to others. As you move forward from this video, I encourage you to begin the 3-day indifference challenge today. Choose one relationship where you've been the pursuer, and for just 3 days, practice philosophical indifference. Notice how it feels. Notice how the other person responds. Notice the freedom that comes with releasing your attachment to their validation. Remember that this journey isn't about perfection. There will be days when you slip back into old patterns of validation seeking. When that happens, implement the Aurelius pause, 3 deep breaths, and the reminder that the person who needs constant validation from others gives away their power to everyone but themselves. The Stoics understood that transformation is a practice, not a one-time event. Each day is an opportunity to strengthen your emotional independence muscle, and with each repetition, it becomes more your natural way of being, rather than something you're striving for. Imagine yourself 1 year from now, having mastered this Stoic approach to relationships, standing confidently in your own worth, surrounded not by people you've chased, but by those who are naturally drawn to your self-contained sense of value. All because you finally understood what Marcus Aurelius knew. True magnetism isn't about what you desperately pursue, but what you peacefully become.